Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping right into a subject that it really sits at the theological center of Catholicism.
It does.
But when you bring it up in, just a casual conversation, it tends to immediately raise two or three huge scriptural question marks.
Absolutely. We're talking about the perpetual virginity of Mary, and it is foundational. Today we're deep diving into sources that articulate not just the belief, but its necessity. We've been unpacking an analysis called The Perpetual Virginity of Mary, Dogma and Necessity.
And it really gets into the definition, the history, and why the Church insists this is de fait.
A necessary article of faith.
So our mission, really, is to understand why this belief is so vigorously defended. And to start, we have to be precise about the definition itself.
What we do.
Because it's a lot more comprehensive than most people realize. It's not just one thing.
Precisely. The core doctrine has three distinct parts, and you have to affirm all of them. First, Mary was a virgin antepartum.
Before the birth. That's the one we all know.
Right, the conception. Second, she was a virgin in part two.
During the act of giving birth.
Crucially, yes, maintaining physical integrity. And then the third part.
This is the one that causes all the friction.
Postpartum. After the birth, remaining a virgin for her entire life. And the sources present this not just as, a biological state,
right,
but as a sign of her total consecration, an undivided gift of herself to God's will.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our goal for you, the listener, is to move past those initial objections and really get the profound theological framework that demands this triple affirmation.
Yes.
So, to begin, we just have to tackle the big ones, the common points of contention you find right there in the New Testament.
You have to.
People almost always start with Matthew 1.25. It says, Joseph knew her not until she had borne a son. I mean, if it says until then, doesn't that just imply they did consummate the marriage afterward?
That's the straightforward reading in English, and it is the key question the sources have to resolve. What's fascinating here is how the source material gets into the specific linguistic structure of the original Greek.
So they argue we're sort of imposing our modern usage on an ancient idiom.
Exactly. The word in question is the Greek adverb hios, and the sources argue its use here just denotes what did not happen up to a certain point.
Without saying anything about what happened after.
Without necessarily implying any change afterward. It's a rhetorical device. It emphasizes the integrity of that period before the birth.
Okay, that sounds a little technical, though. Do we have other biblical examples where until doesn't mean and then things change?
We do, and the sources rely on them heavily. A great example is Psalm 110.1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool.
Right. He doesn't get up once the enemies are defeated.
Of course not. The sitting continues. The word just signals the completion of a condition, not a change in the original state.
That does give a strong linguistic basis for the defense. But the second objection, this one feels even more direct.
The brothers of Jesus.
Yes, the brothers. Matthew and Mark mention James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. I mean, how do you get around that?
This is where you really have to dive into the cultural and linguistic context of the first century. The sources explain that in the Semitic languages that Jesus and his contemporaries spoke, Aramaic, Hebrew, there just wasn't a distinct common word for cousin or nephew or, any extended male relative.
So the Greek word we read, adelphos, which gets translated as brother, was basically a catch-all term for any close male kin.
Exactly. Adelphos could mean cousins, nephews, even step-siblings. In some early traditions, they were thought to be Joseph's children from a prior marriage.
And is there any evidence inside the New Testament itself to back that up? To suggest they weren't her sons?
Yes, there is. A very specific detail the sources highlight. If you cross-reference the Passion narratives, these so-called brothers, James and Joseph specifically, are identified as children of another woman.
Also named Mary.
Also named Mary, who is later identified as the wife of Clopas.
So they're Jesus's cousins, not sons of the Theotokos.
That's the argument. The linguistic flexibility resolves what just looks like a flat contradiction to us.
That clears up a huge puzzle. Okay, one more. What about Jesus being called the firstborn in Luke? If he's the first, doesn't that suggest a second?
The sources clarify that firstborn was a legal and religious term under Jewish law. It was a status.
Not a number.
Not a number. It applied to the first male son born, period, because that son required consecration under the law of Moses. It had to do with temple ritual, not a count of subsequent children.
So if we can explain away the linguistic issues, how far back does this tradition of perpetual virginity actually go? Let's trace the history.
It's not a late invention. The belief is described in the sources as ancient, attested from the 2nd century, and, this is important, never absent from Orthodox teaching.
So even in the patristic period, the church fathers saw this as necessary.
They did. Let's nail down some of those early witnesses.
Who was saying this before it was, officially defined?
You can start with St. Ignatius of Antioch. He died around 107 AD. He saw Christ's birth as this unique mystery, one kept hidden from the devil, which implies, a unique vessel.
Okay.
Then you jump to Origen in the 3rd century, who calls it settled doctrine. He states it plainly. There is no child of Mary except Jesus.
So by the 4th century.
It was very firm. Figures like Epiphanius of Salamis were already using phrases like the virginal workshop of the Incarnation.
But here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because consensus always invites a challenge.
Always. And the first major public challenge came in the late 4th century from a theologian named Helvidius around 383 AD.
And he was the one who just insisted on that literal reading of until and brothers.
Yes. He argued Mary had a normal marriage with Joseph after Jesus was born, and this prompted a definitive, systematic counterattack.
From St. Jerome.
From St. Jerome. His work against Helvidius became the classic go-to defense for centuries.
So what was Jerome's argument, beyond the linguistic points we already covered?
Well, he provided 3 powerful, interconnected arguments. First, he stressed that Joseph was merely a guardian. The marriage was for protection, not consummation.
Right.
Second, he solidified the idea that the brothers were cousins. Or he also drew on that early tradition from the Proto-Evangelium of James that they were Joseph's children from a prior marriage, step-siblings.
And the third point, this one was culturally huge, wasn't it?
It was. Jerome insisted on the superiority of virginity over the married state. He argued it was just inconceivable that a woman graced by the Incarnation would willingly forfeit that miraculous gift for a lesser state.
And this defense worked.
It was incredibly successful. Synods condemned Helvidius's followers as heretical almost immediately. From there, the belief moves from common tradition to formal dogmatic definition.
Let's get those dates.
The Second Council of Constantinople in 553 and then the Lateran Synod in 649 specifically affirmed Virginitas in Part 2.
The integrity during the birth itself?
Yes, that the birth itself was miraculous, leaving her physically intact, mirroring how Christ's divine nature conquers physical limits.
So this was established early and just held on.
Right through the medieval era with St. Thomas Aquinas, and then reaffirmed in the modern era in the Catechism, which calls her virginity a sign of faith unadulterated by any doubt. The weight of history is immense.
Now we get to the core of it. The so what? The theological engine driving this doctrine. If we connect this to the bigger picture, why do the sources insist this isn't just some pious belief, but is intrinsically linked to the entire story of salvation?
This is the key. The sources argue it's a necessary safeguard for other interconnected mysteries. The Incarnation, redemption, Mary's own dignity. And the strongest arguments come from St. Thomas Aquinas. He laid out 4 reasons why denying her perpetual virginity was theologically abhorrent.
Let's break those down, starting with Christ himself.
The first reason is Christological perfection. The argument is that since Christ is the only begotten Son of the Father in his divinity, it is supremely fitting that he also be the only begotten son of his mother in his humanity.
So having other siblings would sort of cloud that perfect mirror of his divine status.
It would diminish that unique sonship. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second reason?
The second is the shrine of the Holy Spirit. Mary's womb, having housed the Son of God, is called the Sacrarium Spiritus Sancti, the sanctuary of the Holy Spirit.
So sacred ground.
Exactly. And to have subsequent marital relations would be, in the view of the fathers, to desecrate it, an insult to the Holy Spirit.
So the vessel used for divine purpose must remain set apart forever.
Permanently. And this connects perfectly to that dramatic prophetic imagery the fathers used.
You're talking about Ezekiel's closed gate.
Absolutely. Ezekiel chapter 44, the prophecy says, "This gate shall be shut, because the Lord, the God of Israel, hath entered in by it, therefore it shall be shut."
And they applied that imagery of a permanently sealed gate directly to Mary.
Directly. It's a powerful visual. If the Lord passes through space, that space is forever consecrated. It must remain shut to all others.
Okay. So what's the third reason for the necessity?
The third is Mariological dignity. Denying her virginity after the birth suggested that Mary, of her own free will, chose to move away from this incredible, miraculous favor God had shown her.
It would make her famous fiat, her yes, seem temporary.
Exactly. Her yes is seen as an undivided gift of herself to God's will for her entire life, not just for a 9-month period.
And the final reason, it centers on Joseph's role, right?
Correct. Aquinas argued that to deny this would be to impute extreme presumption in Joseph. It suggests he just ignored the angelic message, that he violated the sanctity of the very mystery he was chosen to protect.
So Joseph's honor is also at stake.
His reverence, yes.
Let's circle back to a point you made earlier. Virginitas in part 2, her integrity during the birth. The sources draw a really beautiful, if esoteric, connection between that and the resurrection.
They do. It's highly symbolic. The argument is that the miraculous way Christ entered the world without, opening the traditional gate.
It mirrors how he passed through closed doors after his resurrection.
Exactly. As we see in John chapter 20, just as his resurrected body conquers physical barriers, the birth of the incarnate Word conquers the normal physical consequences of birth. It distinguishes his birth from all others, signaling his victory from the very beginning.
It's all part of one coherent, integrated system.
A complete system.
But we have to clarify one thing. Denying perpetual virginity doesn't negate Mary's primary title, right? Theotokos, Mother of God. That was defined at Ephesus.
That is dogmatically true, yes. Her maternity is fulfilled in conceiving and birthing the Word made flesh.
So if she's still the Mother of God, either way, why is this detail worth fighting for? What is actually lost if you let it go?
That is the core question for the modern listener. And the sources insist that while the title Theotokos remains, denying the postpartum virginity significantly diminishes her role. It turns her motherhood into something less exalted and less perfect.
How so?
It weakens the symbolic depth of the incarnation. God's act was sovereign, it was unique, and so it demands a fitting, unique vessel. If her virginity isn't perpetual, that symbolism of the closed gate is broken.
So the belief is really an act of profound reverence for the event of the incarnation itself.
That's the argument. Her physical preservation is the permanent, undeniable sign of her exceptional holiness, her role as the new Ark of the Covenant. If the sanctuary of the Holy Spirit is later used for carnal purposes, the narrative of that divine event risks becoming ordinary.
It loses its permanence.
It ensures the divine act is seen as unique and definitive.
So to sum this all up, what this all means is that we've traced this very specific doctrine from its linguistic roots, through the historical challenge of Helvidius, the defense of Jerome, to the systematic arguments from Aquinas. The key takeaway is that the doctrine requires all three affirmations, ante, in, and postpartum, to safeguard all these interconnected mysteries.
To ensure Christ's unique divinity and Mary's role as the model of total consecration.
And the sources conclude that for us today, this doctrine acts as a kind of an eschatological witness.
It's not about devaluing marriage, not at all. It's presented as pointing toward a transcendent ideal, a heavenly purity, a demonstration of divine grace triumphing over human limits.
It invites you to reflect on one final idea. If her fiat, her yes to God, was a total and lifelong consecration, what does that say about the spiritual power of commitment? The sources argue her physical integrity is just the outward sign of an absolute inner surrender. For you, the listener, how does that idea of total, lifelong consecration redefine the power of a single promise?
Something for you to mull over, an excellent thought to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.